EU member states have given their initial backing to plans to launch a mission to protect ships in the Red Sea, which have come under attack in recent weeks from Iran-backed Houthi militants in Yemen. Well, a US-led mission is already operating in the region, and it carried out new strikes on Yemen last night. The Houthis say they are acting, though, in solidarity with the Palestinians. Well, in a bid to cut off their funding and supply of weapons, Washington has put the Houthis back on a US list of terrorist organizations. But the Houthis dismissed this today, saying it'll have no impact on them. Well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak now to Helen Lackner, who is an author and expert on Yemen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, how are the Houthis reacting to these US-led attacks?
Well, basically, they're responding in kind. I mean, at every US strike, the Houthis say we will strike back. And what was clear is that the original strike last Thursday night to Friday, where 60 areas, more than 60 areas were hit, and which was then described as a one-off, clearly is not a one-off because it's happening again. It was also estimated that at best it attacked or it hit about 30% of the Houthi arsenal. So the Houthis still have considerable capacity. And their main response to anything is, if you hit us, we will hit back.
And Washington's hit them in another way, putting them back on this list of terrorist organizations. Is that likely to make any difference, do you think?
It's going to make an enormous difference to Yemenis in general. And the Yemeni people, both those under Houthi area control and elsewhere, are going to be very badly affected. It will affect, in particular, the arrival of remittances from people outside Yemen, and that's a very, very important source of income for the majority of Yemenis with the collapse of the economy. But it will not stop the Houthis. The Houthis basically thrive on having enemies and on having active enemies. And they will also, given the circumstances and given the fact that their support for Palestine is what's making them particularly popular throughout Yemen and way beyond Yemen, it will improve their popularity, even though the material circumstances of survival for Yemenis are going to worsen significantly.
Yeah, some people are asking why were they ever off that terror list? Because they were taken off the terrorist list by the Biden administration not so very long ago. And some people are now saying, well, they shouldn't have been.
Well, the point of not having them on a terrorist list is that it makes it much easier to have negotiations. And since late 2022, there have been very active and open and explicit negotiations between the Houthis and the Saudis to bring an end to the war, which until very recently, the US was strongly supporting, because Biden was hoping to see in that agreement at least a foreign policy success of being able to claim he's put an end to the war in Yemen. What's been happening in the last week is completely reversing this situation.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, Yemen's been in a devastating war for several years. And I just want to pick up on what you were saying earlier on. I mean, how do you think the average Yemeni person feels about their country being dragged into another conflict, which is obviously acting in Iran's best interest, not necessarily in Yemen's best interest?
Well, I think one has to remember that the Yemeni population, just as the populations throughout the Middle East or throughout the Arab world, are very, very strongly in favor of Palestine and very horrified by what's been happening in Gaza. And so that has increased the Houthi support very considerably. So although, they know they're going to suffer, I still think that the fact that this is happening in support of Palestine and against Israel is something that will continue to retain the popularity of the Houthis and reduce the anger or frustration of the Yemeni people in general. And I think this goes, obviously for the Yemenis, but also generally for people throughout the region. And the Yemenis do not see themselves and the Houthis do not see themselves as doing things in the interests of Iran. They do see themselves as doing something in support of Palestine and on the basis of their own beliefs.
Who do you see as being a good mediator potentially in this conflict? I mean, the Saudis were at war with the Houthis, but they don't seem to be too involved in what's happening right now in the Red Sea. They've sort of taken a step back. That's left, obviously, the United States and the UK. We gather the European Union is potentially is going to join this task force in the Red Sea. But who can negotiate an end to all of this?
Well, if you mean an end to the Yemeni war, because again, there's the Gaza war and there's the Yemeni war, I think, the Houthis and the Saudis, with Omani help, had really reached a point where it was likely that there was going to be an agreement. I think, again, it's the same situation, is that if you end the war in Gaza, that will also immediately stop the Houthi actions in the Red Sea. I mean, we all know that the only state that really has any influence, if at all, on the Israelis is the US. So, I think if you're talking about solving the Gaza problem, I think it needs US intervention, it needs Europeans, very strong intervention. It needs intervention from absolutely everybody to put pressure both on the Israelis and on the Palestinians to reach some kind of agreement that would make a Palestinian state possible. I think the events of the last 3 months and a bit are really have a very fundamental impact on and will change the history of the region. But I think when you're talking about the Yemen situation, as you pointed out, the Saudis have been very quiet because they were hoping that they would still be able to have their agreement and their end to the Yemeni war, which wouldn't actually have been an end to the Yemeni war, but it would have been an end to their involvement in the Yemeni war, which is something that is and that remains important for the for the Saudi leadership, who really wants to focus their energies on the development of Saudi Arabia and their new development strategies, which do, as it happens, include some very enormous investments along the Red Sea coast in tourist and other related activities. So they certainly don't want to see, a war along the Red Sea. And, so I think when it comes to the Yemeni war, I think the best possible mediators who have been the most active until in recent years and months are the Omanis. And I think to a slight extent, maybe the Qataris could be involved. But I think, up to now, it's been the Omanis and Europe, Europe until recently, or until now, still has a good reputation in Yemen. So also the European Union is in a position to try and mediate things.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We're out of time. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us and answering all our questions. Helen Lackner, author and expert on Yemen. Thank you very much indeed for your time this evening.
Thank you. Good night.